This lecture, the first paragraph kind of says it all. It's a very meaningful paragraph. We in the spirit world are so happy when we have the opportunity to help human beings. And there's really only one help and no other. It is helping you to find in yourself that which obstructs your happiness and to find the law of the divine. To me, that is so significant because it really says that.
You have to admit some people.
Oh, sorry, Teresa.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Frank Gallagher. Oh, it's not really Frank. Hi, everyone. I just was starting my recap of the lecture, but I read from the first paragraph that there's only one help and no other. It is helping you to find in yourself that which obstructs your own happiness and to find the law of the divine. So, and in the second paragraph, he says something that mirrors that or that complements it, which is you can only seek good and bad in yourself. In other words, the struggle is completely within, entirely within. And the only prayer that means anything is the prayer to help you see what obstructs your own growth. So it takes away victimization, it takes away scapegoating, it takes away worshiping other people, it takes away so much.
blaming other people.
Or putting people on a pedestal, because it's so profound that the guide says that you have to seek the good and the bad in yourself. That is essentially what we're able to do on the path. And when we outpicture things and seek evil or good and fight them or welcome them outside of ourselves, we are distracted from the inner struggle, from the deeper struggle, the meaningful struggle. So I felt those two paragraphs, which begin this lecture, have so much in them that you could almost meditate on them for the whole time. I mean, that is really the Pathwork message, that our job is to understand and bring out that which obstructs our happiness. And the greatest blessing is that we're able to see what that is, to expose it, to admit it, to own it, and then to transform it. And in the third paragraph, this is a short introduction. The first three graphs are like an introduction to the lecture. It talks about what people think about when they talk about evil. He says we think of something specific and often drastic. Like war or cruelty or torture or violence. But he says it is not all the manifest cruelty and wickedness in their extreme forms. It is all ignorance, all evasion, all error, all deviation from truth in every possible form, for truth is God. That is a pretty heavy sentence, right? Truth is God. So when you think about the quest for truth today and the commandment that we have, I think, to do our utmost to find our truth, to be as faithful to the truth as we can, well, that's really a commandment then to be in God, to be as close to God as we can, if God is truth. Okay, so that's the introduction to the lecture. And then the lecture has a couple of sections. The first is about images. And then there's the section about guilt. Now, images, I guess everyone is familiar with what they are, right? Images are misconceptions that one forms usually early on in childhood, which are wrong ideas about the way the world works. Like for myself, I had a brother that died very young when he was 3 and I was 4 in an accident. And so my mom really took a lot of care of me and was overprotective of me. And I developed the image that if I can just make the woman happy, everything's going to be fine. So I didn't have, it was to kind of to give up my own autonomy in this quest to make everything right. I've got to make things right. So I would call that my main image. So everyone has a main image and also other images about just about how to live, like prescriptions for how to live that work sort of temporarily and work in certain circumstances, but don't work in other circumstances and lose their ability to, they're counterproductive ultimately. Um, like, I shouldn't be able, the guide, the discussion about the pseudo solutions of pride, self will, and fear, and then the way we defend against our feelings in different ways. Those are also aspects of images. Like if I don't feel my feelings and I'm strong and invulnerable, then I'll get what I want because everybody will be envious of me and things like that, concepts like that. So um, the guide talks about images in the first section, and that's sort of under the heading of old stuff, right? The guide, this is interesting, it's lecture 49. So it's not that far into the Pathwork lectures, but the guide is already saying, if you think you know about your images, it's a mistake. You may know intellectually, but emotionally, you have to digest this information and you have to try to do the work emotionally with these images that may still be may still be with you, and even if you think that you've overcome them or you understood them. So the guy says that there's a common denominator in all the images, which is that self-centeredness will protect you from being hurt or bring you a reward. And in another context, the guide said that excessive self-concern is the root of all evil, the lower self. So somehow in our image, we believe that selfishness will bring us the reward that we want, will protect us from being hurt. So the guide asks that we should ask ourselves the question, in what way have I been selfish? In what way has my conclusion been wrong from this viewpoint? What is the right conclusion? Conclusion, that means the image. What's wrong about the image? And then the guide says that trying to rid yourself of self-centeredness because you don't want it to be seen is one thing. But if you're sincerely trying to rid yourself of self-centeredness because you care, you want to give to other people, you sincerely want to bring happiness and love into your surroundings, that's a pure motive and that could succeed. So in the section about images, the guide says that we are ashamed of our selfishness, so we cover it up. And then the guide talks about the concepts of the mask self and the lower self. The mask being on page 2, I believe. When we are ashamed of our negative feelings and we try to mask them, and then we are unable to get beyond those negative feelings unless we're able to admit them and transform them and confront them. He says this in the middle of page 2. So long as you try to push the deeper feelings away because of an outer or inner must, you cannot succeed. This must creates not only a forcing of yourself, and as you know, emotions do not respond to compulsion, but also an impure motive. You want to do away with undesired and unadmitted tendencies quickly because they make you appear in an unflattering light. So that is the attempt to cover up negativity and anger, negative qualities that are beneath the mask self that one doesn't expose because one is afraid that one will be rejected. And then later on, of course, the guide is talking about these are things that one has to recognize emotionally. intellectual understanding is not sufficient. So the guide says also, be open to self-understanding and be open to understanding yourself in a different way than you might have thought you were. In other words, don't have a fixed idea of your character, of your personality. And as you search and kind of go inward and try to find out what you're like through the process of daily review or in pathwork sessions or in what we used to call an image finding session with somebody else who you trust and care about, you might find that parts of your character seem unusual. The guide says that often someone who is considered to be very generous can also have a selfish side. So I think it's all about flexibility. It's all about tuning in to more self-knowledge. Now that's the first section of the lecture. The second section is about guilt, and it's about real and false guilt, or justified and unjustified guilt. He says that unjustified guilt has to do with three things: the guilt for not being perfect, and needless to say, none of us is perfect, but I think many of us feel guilty that we aren't perfect. Certainly people like me that have a strong idealized self-image, you want to be seen as being perfect. You feel guilty because you're not perfect, but that's not a justified guilt. That's not a legitimate guilt. That's a guilt that basically is hiding your own perceptions from yourself. Then the second kind of unjustified guilt, the guide says, is around sex. That guilt about the sexual drive is unjustified. He calls it absurd. However, justified guilt is something like the desire not to love, or the impulse not to love. If you are afraid of loving and you give in to the fear, and therefore you don't reach out to someone that you could reach out to, you don't make a move out into the world that you could, that is something you could justifiably feel guilty about and try to remedy. And this is a really interesting section about guilt, about hurting people out of selfishness, he says, is out of imperfection, blindness, and ignorance. To make restitution, one acknowledges that one acted out of ignorance and selfishness. He suggests a meditation. I was too much of a coward to dare to love and forget my own little ego. I admit that I've hurt people by this attitude, and I'm now willing to learn exactly how I hurt them. It makes no difference whether I inflicted the hurt by deed, word, thought, or emotional reaction, by what I have done or left undone. I truly want to change. With the help of God, I will succeed. In order to do so, I must clearly see the direct or indirect hurts my attitude has inflicted upon others. I want to emphasize that point again. If you hurt someone, the guide says, you've unwittingly inflicted the hurt. Unintentional hurt because it was committed out of your wrong image conclusions. Everybody follow that? In other words, the image is something that we have as a self-protective device to make us survive, things that we believe we need to do to survive, so we protect ourselves. And then we hurt somebody else because of the wrong conclusions that we have made through our image. And therefore, it's unintentional. In other words, in some sense, we didn't mean to do the hurt. We are only acting out of our compulsions, our image, which compels us to hurt other people, primarily because of self-centeredness and because of fear. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Can't hear you.
No, I was just saying, yes, you're being very clear. And it's wonderful to have a release of any guilt for trying to protect yourself by using the only way you know at that point, which is the image and the conclusion of the image.
Right. So the guy doesn't really let us off the hook, but well, in a sense, he does. I mean, he says that it's so interesting that, and then again, we don't understand what we're doing because the image is unconscious. And the image runs our life. The images run our life. And they have power because they are unconscious. And the minute you grapple and grasp an image, it loses power. And I guess at that point, you're also more able to reach out to somebody in a loving connection, and you're more able to see how you might have hurt them unintentionally. So I think that is a very key insight in this lecture, which I actually don't remember seeing in other lectures.
Alan,
Yes.
wouldn't all things that people do to hurt other people come from images?
Well, I'm not sure because, of course, is intentional cruelty. There is negative intentionality. But, I guess that for a long time, I've subscribed to the concept that evil is born out of ignorance. I mean, the guide has a sophisticated map about what evil is, the concept that we talked about a couple of sessions ago. But I would say primarily that's true. Primarily it is. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that that's the only way evil manifests itself, from unconscious images, unconscious desires, unconscious impulses.
Seems like intentional cruelty's got to come from someplace else. Who would do that?
Yeah. I think that the guide also makes a distinction between people who have evolved to a certain extent where they're not going to commit intentionally trying to hurt people. Right. I think that nobody who really is on the pathwork, follows the path or a spiritual path, will do that. Nobody has people have made a decision not to live that way.
You just do it by accident, as you were saying.
That's another story.
Through your images, you inadvertently hurt somebody, which is very
Yes.
different than if you set out to hurt somebody. So I think it's pretty fair to say that anybody, all of us, and anybody who's following the pathwork is at the point they're not intentionally trying to hurt people anymore. I would think.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, for the purposes of this discussion, I suppose we're talking about how the images which are unconscious create behavior that
Inadvertently hurts people.
And that can be called or gives rise to justified guilt. When you have the opportunity to care, to love, to be engaged, and you don't do it, then that is because of an image. I think that
Okay.
that's what Guide is saying in this lecture. So, the idea of sacrifice, that a key concept in the lectures, and also in many religions, of course, is sacrifice that isn't really sacrifice, right? Because it seems to be sacrifice to care for other people, to give away your possessions, to
Right.
give away your energy. The whole thing about if you give energy, make effort in a good way, it gets returned to you. So the sacrifice is really illusory. And the more you lose yourself, the more you gain, right? So that is something that the guide is also saying in this lecture. Accepting justified guilt is being in truth, and it takes courage. The life force will then seep through all of your devious channels and affect them, so that slowly and surely you will dissolve all the destructiveness of the forces of evil that rage in you due to your ignorance and emotional immaturity. So I think that's a sort of a restatement of what we just said, which is that evil rages in you due to ignorance and emotional immaturity, not due to your desire and intent to commit evil. And so every time we make recognitions about our images, as the guide says, it seeps through and dissolves I mean, I see the images as being rigid forms. They're things that are crystallized and they need to move and they need to be dissolved. So in the questions and answers that follow, there's a lot of questions and answers. Like, why are we tired in the spring? Okay, but that's the second one. Right?
It's the pollen.
It's the pollen.
It is the
That's
pollen.
right. It's here on page.
Right.
The guide, you know, has a lot of definitions. The first question, would you kindly define emotional maturity? The guide basically gives a lot of definitions. Number one, emotional maturity means being unafraid to pay the price of living. And the price of living includes an occasional hurt or disappointment. Right now, this is very familiar Pathwork concept, which is the little child thinks everything's going to go perfectly all the time. And if it doesn't go perfectly all the time, you're going to get into a towering rage. Okay. However, and the guide, of course, says that you've got to pay the price. Here we are on the planet Earth. There is pleasure and pain. We must accept both. And doing that, being able to do that is emotional maturity. He also says, emotional maturity also means being unafraid of your own emotions. So for intellectual types like yours truly, that is a call to be unafraid about the emotions that one has and accept them. Also, later the guide says, the emotionally mature person knows there's always a price to pay. Emotional maturity or emotional health means knowing what you want, wanting what you can have, and being willing to pay the price for it. Now that is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, if you want a good job, you have to get a degree or study hard or learn skills. You have to pay a price. And of course, the guide says, these are universal truths taught in all religions and philosophies of any value. Humanity has tried for a long, long time to live up to these ideas, yet people have largely ignored the danger of self-deception. They've ignored their habit of using the many layers of consciousness to hide reactions that do not accord with these truths. So you will often find people who act outwardly according to the universal truths, yet you feel their behavior is not quite genuine. Inwardly, they're hiding many reactions that are contrary to the universal spiritual truths. So here in the next paragraph, the guide recaps yet again the pathwork, which is, quote, we want to find that part in you where you are all still undeveloped, where you are primitive in your selfish reactions. So, you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes I feel like we all should go around and talk about our primitive and selfish reactions, because that's kind of the nub of things, really. It's not about
It's okay.
how great we all are.
No.
It's not about how friendly we are, right? It's not about good things. It's about primitive things. It's about anger. Well, not necessarily anger, but it's about selfishness. It's about, you know, our hidden, concealed reactions to things where we operate from self-will, pride, and fear. So we could talk about how we are affected by self-will, pride, and fear, and how we feel those things coming up in relation to any issues or crises in our lives. You know, where's the pride and the self-will and the fear? Anyhow, then at the end of this big question about what emotional maturity is, then the guide talks about, of course, the mask and the lower self. Which is, you unconsciously assume the mask of goodness. You may have bent over backwards trying to hide what was behind it. And what's underneath it, he says, he talks about hate, aggression, rebellion, and anger. That's behind the mask. But that is not the final truth of ourselves. Discover the difference between suppressing these emotions and accepting them as a symptom of your not knowing the answer to your life, of not yet having found the key to your being. Okay, well, those are most of the concepts in the lecture. Oh, interestingly enough, in the next question, why are people tired, especially in the spring? Kind of a funny question, amusing question, right? Um, Fatigue is a symptom that you are suppressing knowledge and recognitions from yourself. Yeah, tell that to all the people with CFS, right?
Right.
Chronic fatigue syndrome. But of course, obviously, as the guide said in the beginning, you look for good and evil within yourself. It's not our job to judge others and tell them you're this and you're that, and that's why you're a certain way, right? Because that's completely, am I right, Tracy? I mean,
Yes.
that is just a distraction from the real event, which is
Yourself.
And this, of course, comes back to what I said earlier about when you expend energy in the service of God or love, it comes back to you. I asked my mother, she's 100 years old and she's in bed all the time. I said, Mom, when I put out a lot of effort caring for you, does it come back to me? And she nodded, yes, it does. So it doesn't matter if I get up 3 times in the night, I'm still got lots of energy because I'm doing a good thing, taking care of the old lady. And then there was questions about Job, which I will skip over. The last question, he says about expectation of failure or success. Question about positive thinking as opposed to acceptance. I guess in 1959, Norman Vincent Peale's book was a big deal, right? The Power of Positive Thinking, I think. But here the guide says, key pathwork concept, that the important point is not so much what you consciously think. It is much more important to learn to become aware of what you unconsciously feel. The feelings trump the thoughts. The feelings are more powerful. And so he says, this is a real guide to living life in a pathwork fashion. This other paragraph, which I will read briefly. The recommended attitude, like toward issues in your life, is neutrality. Let go of your self-will without being either optimistic or pessimistic. Just wish to learn from anything that happens to you. Let whatever happens be an indication of where you are and what problems to tackle. You can consider any happening as a reflex of your unconscious reactions. If you observe your emotions, you will finally break through into yourself and get the recognitions you need for more thorough self-understanding. Later on, there's no miracle key. Nothing can be truly solved unless you understand your unconscious motives and trends. Once you know your unconscious mind, you will just naturally be. You will take life as it comes. You will have success and failure. Life should bring both, and you will be equipped to meet both. Both will make you strong. So it's not an affirmation or a mantra. It is an invitation to deepen our consciousness of what is unconscious. All right, Tracy, what are your thoughts and why did you recommend this lecture?
Well, I recommended this lecture for this one sentence. And if you seek the divine outside of yourself, you will have a difficult time finding it. So the only place to seek either evil or the divine is within you. And the reason I found this one sentence so powerful is because I've come very much into a belief that, as you said, everything, it's about us. That there really isn't anything external other than a reflection of our own consciousness at any point in time. So that the external world and people serve one function, one main primary function in terms of your spiritual development, which is to mirror to you where there are disturbances within you. And I once I went through, I no longer have the instinct to blame anybody or anything. I really, really believe that everything that I'm experiencing, I'm creating through my own internal consciousness, vibration, whatever word you want to. So I just thought this one sentence or two sentences really summed it up, because so many, because it's both sides of the coin. If we look for God outside of ourselves, we're looking in the wrong place, as well as if we look for to blame. If we look for, this did that, or the world did this, or he did, or she did, or it's all everything is inside of us, and that's why I picked the lecture. The other thing I want to say is that you made a good point about feelings trumping thoughts. So I've sort of have a hierarchy. So thoughts trump words, and we all learned that as children. It's not what you say, it's what you do. So words are easy to say, and a lot of people will glad hand and say the right thing, but they don't come through, and their motives aren't aligned with their words. So what you think is going to trump what you say, but how you feel is going to trump what you think. So that the hierarchy, and I found that to be fascinating, because that's the very hierarchy that the guide says in terms of purification. The first is just to stop saying mean things and stop doing mean things. That's the first step. Then the second step is to try to control your thoughts, so that you don't, even though you've got control over your actions and your words, you're not harboring thoughts, because thoughts are energy forms. And if you're sitting around, thinking hateful thoughts about somebody, that energy form is being created and released into the universe. It will hurt that person, but even more important, it's going to hurt you, because whatever you push out into the universe comes back. And then finally, feelings. And this is where I suffered a lot in my path work, was my feelings. And the guide says it over and over: your feelings come last. They're very slow learners. And boy, in my personal case, that's true, because I knew in my brain years before what I could feel, years and years and years before what I could feel. And even though I knew I was, having an image or a misconception or seeing something in the wrong way, I still felt that way, even though I knew absolutely, and I used to have conversations with myself. My feelings took and they're not there yet. I don't want to give the impression that, but they took so long. They're taking so long. It's current, it's present tense, to catch up with what I have known in my brain for the longest time at this point. But those, how you feel, that's where we have to we got to stay there. We just got to keep, and that's why the daily guide is also very helpful to me, because every time I get a little niggle, I call them pings, but however small it could be, I write it down. And then I am often telling Joel, about us, you're not going to believe this one or this one, and like I connect the dots, because I do, no matter how small the niggle or the ping, I call them a ping, no matter how small that ping may be, I don't just slough it off and explain it away to myself, or I write it so that because I know there's something there. That's where the feeling and what's really deep into the subconscious has to be explored, to really get to your real self, which is buried under all these layers of images and pseudo protections and misconceptions, and on and on and on. Somebody else's turn.
Yeah. You keep asking yourself, why are your feelings at variance with your intellect, with what you want to do? Why are your feelings different, right, from your intention?
They're slow learners.
They're slow learners. That's right. Yeah.
Where are they slow learners?
You remember in 1984, the state's goal is to get Winston Smith's feelings to change. At the end of He Loves Big Brother.
Uh-huh.
He thinks about it first. Yeah, it's a little bit of I'm not sure if I think it just underscores the point that the feelings, like, Tracy says they're slow learners. But of course, in that book, he comes to that by a process of repression. I think a different process, completely opposite from our path work, which is the process of bringing the unconscious conscious. Anyway, could be an interesting article though, about 1984 in the path work. So I was wondering, Rita, are you with us? And what do you think?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rita. Yeah, go ahead.
So the craziest thing, I'm on my hands-free phone driving.
Well, don't blame us, you know, if you get an accident.
I'm not blaming anybody. I have both hands on the wheel, and I can hear everything really well, and I'm right with every word. And boy, is this it's always uncanny, but in a sense, it's always exactly the right lecture for me to be working on. So thank you, Tracy, for picking this. And basically, well, Alan, your summary was really, really helpful and targeted all the spots that I'm embarrassed to admit are so, like, it should be elementary, but I guess I haven't been accepting reality. That there's just, everything's got its circumstances. Like, for instance, if you gave the example, you have a job that is in some certain place, well, then you have to travel to that place, right? So that traveling can be, some days it's not very easy. And then there are some other days that it really is easy. So it's just remembering that it's the whole picture, not just one day or certain days, but all the time.
I mean, there's a price to be paid.
Yeah, that's just like you were reading that portion.
Well, the lectures are always a challenge because parts of our body, parts of our characters, I think, don't want to hear it. But the ego doesn't want to hear it. The intellect kind of wants to understand it, but then it wants to suppress it. And some of the feelings, the heart opens to the lecture, but it's also afraid. The ego's afraid. So I think there are like three aspects of our nature, maybe four, that are reading lectures at the same time, and each has a different on the lecture. Or letting the lecture sit. Yeah, Joel? Can I bring Rita, thank you. Did I pass over to Joel?
Yeah.
Okay, here.
Well, just an observation. Tracy and I were talking about this today, about this question of, well, we were actually talking about it in the context of resistance to the pathwork. That we, at least I have experienced numerous times where I'll find something that I don't agree with in the lecture, right? So, because, I mean, I think we're kind of encouraged to accept the fact that the guide is a little more knowledgeable and highly developed than we are, right? But we don't like that. I don't like that. I'm competitive, right? I don't want anybody knowing more, being more spiritually advanced than I am, right? So, but the path work, it's, we're trying to find these images and our negativity and our selfishness and our unawareness of being negative. And so the lower self says, this is all bullshit. What are you talking about? I'm not doing this. I'm not going there. Fortunately, that hasn't happened a lot lately. And so I don't know if that's just practice that I've whipped my lower self into submission. But I think part of it is also we need to have a well-developed sense of ourselves, our self-worth and our self-esteem. And so then that provides, you know, an armor, if you will, against shining the light into the darkness of myself, right? So it's this continuum, right? So we're, you know, and it's, I get, you know, it's like DNA, it's a spiral, right? So we have times where we're joyous and we're peaceful and we're proud of ourselves, and then you know, the next day it's like, oh my God, you know, I forgot whatever, and how could I be so stupid, and you know, oh my God, you know, or yeah, I'm really a shit, you know, whatever. So I think one of the challenges in absorbing and applying the truth of the path work that's presented to us is to be in touch with our divine self, you know, to realize that we are in our essence divine and that we are evolving. You know, all the enlightened beings say you already are enlightened. You know, you are divine. You just don't know it. You don't believe it.
You haven't realized it yet.
Haven't realized it yet. So I think that that's one of the challenges is to, you know, to stick with it, and it gets easier, right? To deal with the negativity and to see it faults once there's a solid base of self-love, of finding ways to connect with the infinite, right? Whether it's through music or art or our work or whatever it is, so that we get out of our thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else here want to say something? Tardia, do you have any thoughts? Not right now? On?
Yeah.
Okay, here's one.
Share a little bit.
Go ahead, please do.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, this lecture is really very powerful, I find, guys. And again, thank you so much for selecting as usual. I mean, you guys do a great, you guys do a great job. You know, always pick like the right one that is needed for the right time. So I really, you know, it's so much here. I mean, that I can. I wouldn't know how to begin, but as you said, Alan, in the first sentence there of the last paragraph, the guy says, you know, that really all the work that we need to do is really find a way to dissolve everything that obstructs happiness. And that makes me think also then the aim of life is to find happiness.
Absolutely.
Right? And then the way I see here is the way to do that is by finding those laws of the divine laws, adhering to them as much as we humanly can, I guess, and practice that. And of course, what the main thing is, as we know, that, you know, the Bible talks about and all religions talk about, and Jesus, I mean, was his main thing is love above all else. So basically, comes down to me learning how to love. And in order to do that, the only way I find is by getting rid of the selfishness.
Yes.
Of the self-centeredness, where we think we are the center of the universe.
Yes.
And everything else have to, you know, to render service to us, to us.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, it's just so incredible, and it just so much again in this lecture that and you know, that is to be learned. And one of the things that I found in the second paragraph was that where the guy says, I mean, I used to think, and this is in the Bible, we all know it, that the kingdom of heaven is within us. I mean, Jesus says this, but I didn't know that the kingdom of hell is also within us. Yes. Okay. What the guy is saying, you know, like, these evil and everything else, is all these bad things, the good and the bad, it's all within us. Yep. And according to how much we exercise, you know, the self, you know, we do the work, the inner work, that is, to overcome, as you said in the last section of the lecture, to know the unconscious, really to become aware of all that material, all those traits and, wrong conclusions, self-deception, misunderstanding, images, of course, the images, and bring that to the surface of our awareness. Become aware of those material or that material that is hidden so deep down in there.
Exactly.
Because then apparently the higher self is there, but also the lower self.
Yes.
They're both there.
Yes.
So the task seems to consist of going through all these obstacles, and which is the layers of the lower self, as we know.
Right.
And so that we can, by so doing, connect to the higher self.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Doesn't it seem?
Sure.
And you have to keep waiting.
Yeah, so it's like this constant work of. So it seems like the real practice is to just know the unconscious, come to know all this material that is hidden down there, and bring it to the surface of our awareness, right? And then through the help of the divine, of course, because it's such an enormous task that cannot humanly be done alone. There's no question that we can do that by ourselves, right?
We're very limited.
Yeah, incredibly so, right? And especially if we're on the ego self, because this is what happened, the way I see it.
Yes.
We have identified with the ego self.
Yes.
So we have we think that we are the ego self.
Yes.
Not realizing that we are the higher self. This is our true essence.
Yes.
Yes. But we think it's like we're mortal. We think we're mortal. We're going to die one day, and this, that, and the other, and all this negativity and all this limitation, as you said, because we have identified with the ego.
With the form.
With the form. With the material.
Right. With the form self.
Yeah. So it's a very sad thing. I mean, again, it's so much,
It starts with the body. And
well, I like this idea about clearing the obstructions, because back in Phoenicia, we had a big stream that ran through the property, and there would be branches and rocks and stuff and mud that would clog up the stream. And it was very often said that, well, that's a good metaphor. In other words, if you go and you do the work of removing the big branches and the logs and the stones, then you let the stream flow smoothly.
Right.
Right? And that, I think, is a really good metaphor, because clutter is a big word, right? Clutter is everyone deals with clutter in their homes. They have too much stuff. And the idea about clearing away the clutter, and certainly that is true emotionally too. I mean, certainly, we clutter our minds by, compulsive behaviors of one sort or another, emotional patterns that are cluttering, that prevent us from getting on with it,
Right.
Byways that we take, which essentially are the equivalent of clutter, ways in which we don't focus on what's important, we get sidetracked, right?
Right.
So in some sense, that's a big, that's half the equation, right? That the guide talks about. Number one being clearing the obstructions. Number two, understanding the divine laws, spiritual laws. So I think this metaphor of clearing away clutter, obstructions, the metaphor of the stream, I mean, it permeates our work.
Yes.
It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's physical, all of that stuff metaphorically, to clear away the clutter so that we can actually hear the voices within. The ego likes clutter because it doesn't want to hear the lower self,
right,
or the higher self. So hey, Nancy, what are your thoughts?
I have kind of a non sequitur thought, but it just jumped out at me in the question of explaining the tiredness of many people. It talked about the destructive forces of the soul. And I have always viewed the soul as sacred and not having destructive forces. It just struck me as really strange.
Where is it?
My thing doesn't have the right numbers. I don't have numbers on mine, but it's the question about tiredness.
Yeah.
Second line down.
I think I read that. Yeah. And I think what the guy is saying there is, the way I understood it, is that what happens is that we suppress the divine force. And of course, it all takes place inwardly. So when we suppress the divine force, this, because the divine force is suppressed, you cannot do that to such enormous power. So it projects out negatively, obviously from the inner self, from the soul, that is. And so it is really the reverse of the divine force that projects out, as you said, as a negative force. But it's not that the negative force is right in the soul, or that it is part of it. It's just that because
The negative force is what one?
I'm sorry?
The negative force is what?
The negative forces are basically the divine force that has been suppressed, pushed down and kept locked in.
Mm-hmm.
So it springs forward, it shoots out, negatively, because the divine force needs to come out one way or the other. So if you suppress it, then it shoots out, as a negative, has a negative manifestation or projection.
Well, I think I think what the guide is saying is that, back in the old days in the Pathwork Center, where there were bioenergetic groups going on, and somebody would sometimes stand up to work and they'd be a very kind of quiet and mild person with not a lot of energy. And they'd just kind of be blasé, blah, blah. And then John Parakos would work with them, putting them into these positions where you'd start feeling energy,
Right.
vibrations, and then the person would start feeling angry, and you'd say, well, why are you angry? Are you angry? And so the person would like release a huge wave of anger and rage.
Right.
And all of a sudden, all the energy would come out. I mean, the person would be powerful, would be mighty. And then when the person kind of experienced those anger feelings in a safe way, by like raging or hitting a pillow,
Right.
like that, then the person would suddenly realize, hey, I've got a lot of energy. It was just locked up. So I think what the guide is saying here is we invest, there's energy, negative energy. It's really one energy current, as the guide says in another lecture. In other words, energy can be transformed from a negative direction to a positive direction, but unquestionably, people have a lot of negative energy and negative acting out that they do. Right? But that needs to be acknowledged, and then it can be transformed or channeled into another direction.
I agree with what you're saying. I've just never heard it associated with the soul, that it's coming from the soul.
Wait a minute, hold on a second.
It's an
I'd
interesting
like
phrase.
to see, so I don't see where you're seeing, Nancy, that the soul is
You see the-
negative.
You see the answer, the second line of the answer to that question, Joel? Tiredness
Can you read it? Can you read that?
the forces of the soul.
I'll read it.
Yes, please.
Tiredness results from suppressing the destructive forces of the soul,
Gotcha.
barring them from the light of consciousness, which can direct them in the right channels until they finally dissolve.
I might say, Nancy, I think it depends on your definition of soul.
Yeah.
I haven't got this in front of me. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to introduce this. Maybe somebody else could answer it. But in my little understanding of the soul is sort of within, in a physical, it's not physical, but it's within me, in this physical form.
Mhm.
And in that way, it may not have the quote purity that we have been taught in the past, that the soul is always perfectly good and perfectly wonderful. And I think, I may be wrong, but that's what is coming onto your mind. If somebody can clarify a definition of the soul that the guide might have mentioned at some point. Because I think that's the problem you're having. I have the same thing, this pure image of the soul. The soul can't be negative. No, I think that the pathwork may not call the soul that way.
Okay.
You were saying, Tracy, you wanted to comment on that.
So I think it's just definitional. We're all souls having a human experience. We don't have a soul. We are a soul. We have a body.
But what's the negativity in the soul? That's what Nancy's question is.
we're souls. I'm a soul, you're a soul, Alan's a soul. We're all, we have negativity. Every single one of us still has negativity in us. Not one of us is yet purified. Because once you're at that point, you're not going to be reincarnating in this kind of a sphere. You be going to different kind of.
Sure.
But we all still have, all of us are souls, and we have negativity in us. So I think when we went to church as little kids, you know, it was sort of like the soul was like the good thing that was inside.
Right.
But I don't think so. I think it's just definitional. I think we're
Okay.
all souls and we have bodies. We're souls having a human experience. And we're
Right.
incarnated.
We also have to purify. So maybe the purification comes in here.
Well, of course, we have to purify, because that's, you know, one person that I follow quite significantly is Eckhart Tolle, and he's constantly saying life is not meant to make you happy. It's meant to wake you up. We're trying to wake up and to realize the truth, which is God. That's what we don't realize. We're all in the process of waking up. It's clear by what people say. And I believe all of us are in the process of waking up.
Okay. Okay.
One thing. So
That's all very helpful. The other thing was on the dealing with the unjustified guilt and the justified guilt. Unjustified guilt, you know, because you're not perfect.
Right.
But then dealing with the justified guilt, the feeling that I'm not perfect comes up, that I can't just free myself from, I can't move fast enough. Yeah, anyway, I don't know. I'm not saying this very clearly, but it just feels like it's such a balancing act between feeling the innocence of the unjustified guilt, and then trying to deal with the justified guilt without falling into the trap of giving up your balance and your that you are worthy. That's where I get stuck.
So the Dalai Lama says it is a human birthright.
It's what?
The human being's birthright.
Oh, you're freezing, and maybe you're freezing because you're not close enough to the computer. I don't know, but you're frozen.
Is that better? Is that better? Now you're frozen. Maybe it's the computer.
No,
It's the
Wi-Fi.
It's the Wi-Fi. All right.
Someone's watching.
The negative forces don't want to hear my message.
Well, I mean, I think
Okay, Alan's
No,
back
I don't
on.
think- I
Okay.
don't think that.
Okay.
Here we are. We're being recorded, so. Hello, Alan, we're back, and you're back.
Alan,
can't-
you're muted.
You're on
Muted,
mute.
though. Muted, Alan. Unmute. Oh, there he is.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that the idea of the unjustified guilt is basically a head trip that gives us an opportunity to cop out on feeling the justified guilt. We don't like the justified guilt. It is annoying. It's an affront because we screwed up. In the justified guilt, we did not love when we could have. We did not reach out when we could have. And we feel badly about it. We don't want to deal with it. So we'd rather have the unjustified guilt, a fantasy about, oh, I should be more perfect, or, you know, oh, gee, you know, I'm interested in sexually in somebody and I shouldn't be because whatever it is. You know, we know that's BS. We know it's not correct. I mean, in other words, we know that there's no spiritual truth in being guilty about sexual desire, the guide says, or that we're not perfect, but it's just another clutter, right? Just another spiritual cluttering thing that clutters up our lives if we focus on unjustified guilt. The justified guilt, though, liberates us. When we're able to say, you know, I was blind and I was unconscious and I hurt you because of something I believed about you that wasn't correct, let's say, then one liberates oneself and one reduces the clutter.
Yeah, because you're taking responsibility
Right.
instead of hiding and saying, oh, you know, whatever you say, but you're taking responsibility. Oh, I did this and I've got to own up to it.
That's right.
Yeah, so you can't let, oh, I'm not there now, I'm not perfect,
You can't let that
stop you from your journey. Okay.
I'm
absolutely.
only, yeah, or hide the reality that sometimes we're definitely unloving.
Yes,
Right.
all of us are.
Well, there you go. I wanted to mention that earlier, just because it came up for me earlier. But the unloving part, or even just in general emotions, for me, the fear is just so big that if I accept it just within myself, not outside, accept that I want to love and I want to be loving. Even that, just I want to be loving. It's horrifying. It's an assault on me. Because why? Because I'm so afraid of it. If I ever let that out in my family, I'll put it onto my earlier. Of course, I recognize that that's me too. But if I ever let out that I need and wanted to be loved, and in my mind, I would be beaten to death.
Sure. Yeah.
So
That's an image. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Personal image.
it's an image, exactly. Exactly. It's an image. But the thing I'm saying is that earlier when we were talking about that, we want to get in touch with these emotions and let them out. But I think we have to recognize, I've been living with it now for the past month, really, in a way, how scary it is. It's really, really scary.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And painful. And painful.
Yep. Amen.
Commit to love. She means to love.
Tracy?
No, I'm just asking the question. Do you mean to love? It's scary and painful.
I mean to recognize within myself that I need to love, want to be loved, and then face the fear that comes up with that.
Of course. We're all like that because you're vulnerable. It's like,
Facing the fear.
You're vulnerable when you admit that to yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
And I have to look at, maybe I'll say it here because now you're telling me, of course, about the image and all the conclusions. I don't know what I know what the conclusion is, that I'm going to be killed and I've decided this as a child. I'm not blaming it on my family, even though I'm saying that. I'm going to be killed because I can't love, I'll be killed. Well, that's, in a way, I guess that's an excuse. That's a protection, but it's not a real protection.
No, it's the pseudo solution.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. But we all feel like that, every single person, because when you are loving somebody, you are vulnerable. I think about, anybody who has children, you really are vulnerable to having tremendous pain if something were to happen to those children. But if you decide to become a parent, you're going to feel that strong love for your children. And we can feel it even for our pets. And then when we lose our pets, it's painful as all heck. So, but we want to protect ourselves from that pain. We're all afraid of that pain.
One take a risk of loving because it can involve suffering.
Well, suffering.
And being rejected, let down.
Suffering. Joel and I were let me just make one point. Joel and I were just talking this week about marriages and how so many people are afraid of being betrayed in a marriage, or it doesn't even have to be a marriage, a relationship, and betrayed or abandoned. Because let's face it, there is a lot of that happening in relationships. And that's why relationships don't survive for long periods. And then we were saying, and even in those relationships where people don't have that, you have a 50-50 chance of being the one who doesn't die first. So just that, even if you don't have anything wrong in the relationship, nobody's cheating, nobody's abandoned, so 50-50 chance of losing that person. Somebody's going to be, unless you go down to the plane together. So you're vulnerable. And we all are so afraid of the pain of being not loved, rejected, whatever, that we sort of take our red ball and go home. You see it in children. Oh, I don't care if you want to play with me. I don't even want to play with you. The expression, take the red ball and go home. It's all a way of trying to protect ourselves from the real pain that we are so afraid of if we love, because we're so vulnerable to something that we love because we could lose it. And a pet is just, we've lost pets. Joel and I've had pets all our whole life. It's excruciatingly painful to lose.
It's devastating. It's devastating.
It's devastating. But then your option is, okay, well, you never have a pet, so you don't have to ever worry about burying them, or God.
What do we do now with the pain? Now that we know, I don't mean the pet thing right now, but stepping back from it and knowing that the pain is just, we're hiding from that pain.
Right.
What do we do? I try to let it up. I try to look at it, but I don't know if that's enough. I don't know.
So
That's what I do.
The answer to that.
I've just done. I've let it
Okay,
up.
Joel, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, I wasn't raised as a Christian. I was raised as a Jew. And the beautiful thing to me about Christianity, one of the beautiful things about Christianity is surrender. So when we have pain, when we have difficulty, we cannot come to, we can't come to the answer through the pathwork or psychological means. We give it to the universe, or we give it, if we believe in God, we give it to God. And we go, we just simple as this. Here, I'm suffering. I hurt. I don't know the answer to this. I'm so alone. I'm such a fuck up. Help me. I don't want this, right? And I honestly believe that the love, however you define it, the infinite, is just waiting there for us to release these our crap, right?
Are things
And
that separate us from
everything that separates us from love is to give it over to God and to ask for help. Please, I see this about myself. I see that I have this image and I'm struggling and I'm disappointed in myself, right? I try to be such a good person, and now in this way I feel like I failed. And in that moment you don't see your magnificence, right? And so you ask, take it and be with me, right? And
I think you're right. That you ask for help.
Yeah.
I think I'm just hearing it now as you're speaking, Joel, that in the pain and in the loss, the aloneness and the fear, if you are able to say, please help me, it changes. You're right. You're right. I've almost forgot it. But yes, you're right.
Well, it seems to me that that's the other half of the equation in the very first paragraph. In other words, the first half of it being try to understand the obstructions, and the second is acquaint yourself with the spiritual laws, the divine laws, which are things that exist, which are things that govern our lives, which are things that reinforce and strengthen us, right? That is another way of saying surrender to God. You surrender to the knowledge of the spiritual laws, of the fact that they do exist and the fact that they do govern how things work.
That they are loving and fair.
Right, that they're loving and fair.
and
That's
forgiving,
right.
and forgiving.
Yes.
And that the apparent tragedy has a meaning behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we have to understand.
That's right.
When my brother died in an accident, the guy told my mother that it was a task that he undertook to be here briefly and die a very painful death. And she accepted it.
Sure, it's true. I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, and the Pathwork says that we have a contract, right?
Yeah, we have a contract. In
And
other words, we
and the
came here with
contract
with
is
a
very
task.
Is very detailed as to what's going to unfold in our life, right? And there's karma that we chose this life. We chose to suffer. We chose many of the things that we've experienced in order to
Wake up.
in order to wake up, in order to become who we really are, which is our divine self.
To realize who we really are, not to become, to realize we
Thank
already
you.
are.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's
To
really
realize,
hard.
to realize who we are already are.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah,
Like
that's
Sai Baba always says,
just
the
the
only
way it
difference
is. Yeah.
between you and me is that I know who I am and you don't yet.
Yep.
And we are all now realizing it. All of us are starting to really realize
No
it.
comments? No.
Oh,
Some non-human members of the group here.
So yeah, like you said, Alan, that there is a message, or there is a reason behind the tragedy. I mean, the way I see it is that way, that like we said earlier, the task is to really come to know the unconscious. So all this material that is hidden in the unconscious, the only way we'll be aware of it or become aware of it is by letting it out, by coming to the surface. Yeah.
you can't.
Mhm.
If it's too buried, you can't even see it.
You cannot even feel it or see it or
Right.
experience
So
it in
that's
any
why-
way.
And that's
Mhm.
where it all's taken. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
Is in that
That's why the things happen.
That's why things
That's
happen.
why things. And so
This
that's
negativity in this incident, and
Right.
this
the
tragedy,
good-
as you
right.
said.
So you need
Mhm.
Mhm.
that area of our soul needs to be uncovered and brought
Right,
up.
and it's
So
so
we
it's
can
so
see it.
important
So we
for
can
us
see it.
also
So we
to
can experience and observe it.
not get fixated on things that happen in our life and be
Right.
flexible enough
Right.
to go through it.
Right.
Exactly.
Because if you don't have a spiritual perspective,
Right.
then you can let a
Well, then you
tragedy or a
resist.
loss dominate your life
Yes.
and kind of harden you.
Hard you. And
So
also
you
you
don't-
resist. You don't. We don't want to suffer. So we try to do everything to resist and to avoid the pain. Whereas if you just let life happen
Yeah.
and embrace the pain as well as
And that's
the
exactly
pleasure.
what the guide says, which
That-
is that you let life
Yeah.
happen. You try to adopt a
right.
neutral attitude,
Right. Knowing that what's happening, you're creating.
knowing that what's happening,
fighting
right?
against what you're creating is a little once you really realize everything you are creating, fighting against it is kind of silly in a way because you
created this for a
you
reason.
just made that cake. If you don't like it, make a different one.
Okay.
True.
Yes.
True.
All right. Any other thoughts, ladies and gentlemen? Anyone want to say something?
Maybe someone from the group.
Anybody
Just two ladies,
online?
A few people. have
Beverly? Oh, yes,
Let's
go
see if
ahead.
she wants to say something.
Susan.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. This has really clarified a lot for me. I've been experiencing a lot of traumatic events going on in my family. And so was trying to understand what it was that that I'm projecting out there, that's coming back at me, and especially so Alan, your summary has been really helpful. The whole discussion has been so helpful, and Tracy, especially the the feelings being the slow learners really helped bring it together for me, because I see that I'm at a place now where I've started noticing and changing my actions, and now I'm starting to notice and change my thoughts. And it took something with my daughter, with my only child, to really begin the process of getting to the feeling place about this. So yeah, I mean, it's, devastatingly painful, but it's so important that I see that I get what's going on for me and can begin to access this in my feelings, and know that this can help my daughter, who's learned a lot from watching me, cope in my, you know, best way I can, the best way I've been able to up until now, and hopefully, we'll do better. Yeah, I'm so grateful I was able to be here tonight, and I just want to thank you all so much, because I'm also feeling just so in need of these deep conversations and the spiritual aspect of what's going on in the world and in my microcosm of it.
Thank you.
All of
Beverly, any thoughts? Anyone else?
Yeah. Similarly to what Susan just said, the idea about feelings being a slow learner really struck me, because I was thinking about in my own life, like I have the intellectual understanding about things, but the feelings are so thick and so deep. It's like I understand that I'm not X, but I still feel it. And the feelings can be overwhelming. And I'm always thinking, well, I have these feelings. What am I supposed to do with them? And I think then Joel said something about developing a solid base of self-love. And I'm thinking, well, how the hell do you do that? Like how? And I guess what he said next kind of made sense to me. He said, you have to find your way to connect to the infinite. And when he said things like music and art, that kind of hit me, because kind of those abstract things that are just so divine feel like something that one can immerse oneself in and allow to permeate, and just allow the thoughts to be released and those feelings to exist. That might just be a way to kind of calm the thoughts and to find another entry point, because the thoughts really and the feelings don't line up.
I want to tell you what I did, which worked, and Marion taught me this. So one of the early lectures, the guide says the mere observation will cause the image and the misconception to start to rise to the surface, to pixelate, to dissolve. And pixelate is Marion's word. So what I did when I first started the pathwork is I just observed. I just kept observing, and it was a very painful period that lasted almost 10 years. Just observing. And by God, those feelings started to pixelate. So let me give you an example with my main image. my main image, which of course I incarnated into the perfect situation to bring it right to the surface, is if I'm with you, if I'm with Joel and he pays no attention to me at all, no problem. We could be in the same house for 24 hours. He could not even speak to me. And I would have no feelings of being rejected, ignored, it would just be a nothing. If somebody else comes into the environment and he starts, and it doesn't matter if it's a woman or a man, this is not a sexual kind of thing. If somebody else comes into the environment and he starts paying attention to them, I'm suddenly seized by fear. And it's interesting. My dog Addison is the same way. She's got the exact same image. But so I incarnated into a situation where I was the firstborn. I was the only child for 3 years. Then suddenly my brother came along. My mother now had 2 children and she had a baby. She couldn't pay attention to me all the time because she now has a baby and the baby needs to be fed. The baby needs to be changed. So that brought that in because I didn't need my mother's attention for I was perfectly fine playing by my, but as soon as my brother Jeff came to the picture, if she's focusing on him, it made me feel that she didn't love me. So this was my main image. So it presents itself in so many ways. I have notebooks full of pings, and it's all that image disguised in different forms. So what I used to do is like, oh, interesting, Tracy, isn't this interesting? You just felt rejected, ignored, not loved, whatever. And isn't that interesting? That's your main image, and here it is, and then after years of just noticing it and allowing it to happen, the pixelation started. And now I'll still get it, but it'll be very transient and gone. Whereas in the past, I'd be, just, in a state of like, oh, nobody loves me. I'm worthless. I'm no good, and on and on and on. So I heard a question, what can you do? I mean, Joel had a suggestion and this was my suggestion. Just watch it. Just watch it. And it starts to dissolve it. Amazingly, it starts to dissolve it. And Marion taught me that, remember?
Yeah.
So Joel, did you want to? Are you sure, Juan? Yeah, I think Juan wants to.
Yeah,
say.
I just want to say one last thing about pertaining to the maturity part of the lecture, Alan. That you mentioned something that it's about paying the having the willingness to pay the price. But it also impressed me the way the guy said about emotional maturity. What it really is, I think he said also that it is having the capacity to love. So basically, we as having the ability to love, it signifies emotional maturity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So basically, the more we can love, the more mature we are.
Yes.
And then also that tied to selfishness, because then the more selfish we are, obviously the more incapable we are of loving, right?
Right.
And then that of course that creates that ties down to also the having that guilt, that justified guilt, because when you don't love out of commission or omission, then obviously you are being selfish. You are being selfish, and you are obviously not loving. You're withholding that love from giving to those.
And that's the justified guilt.
And that's a justified guilt. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the loving is the more you love, the more you can love.
The more you can love.
It's
Yeah.
like
it multiplies.
It multiplies.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, Joel.
Tracy taught me something very simple a long time ago. She said that according to the Pathwork, there are only 2 choices. Either you're extending yourself towards other, or you're withdrawing, or you're withholding, right? So either you're giving love or you're withholding love. And so that is very simple, that I can understand in any given situation, right? Somebody asks me to do something, of course, somebody wants to ask us to do something, usually we don't want to do it, right? We want to do what we want to do. And the other thing, part of that is is to take little steps, right? When we're withholding, right? And we're usually withholding out of self-protection or fear. We're not going to come out of that state all of a sudden and just become, like St. Francis, taking care of everybody and not thinking about ourselves. So once we have that awareness that, oh, okay, in this situation I withhold, or with this person I tend to withhold, I look for modest improvement, right? I'm not going to suddenly be transformed with somebody that I don't trust or who's hurt me in the past and become, very expansive, right? And vulnerable.
What if the person that you're withholding love from is yourself?
Well, that's the other thing. So you look for little ways to open that up and find the ways that you already are loving or where you're just connected, and spend that time, meditating, praying, activities that you enjoy, going to get an ice cream cone, having a bath, lighting a candle, cooking a nice meal for yourself, whatever it is, right? Is it, if we are the divine, right? So then we have a responsibility so if I'm taught that whenever I see somebody else, I'm looking at God, right? Well, then if you're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of God, you see? So if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of him, her. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Also, whatever you put out into the universe comes back because it's reflective.
Say that again.
Whatever you put. This is what I think karma is. I think the universe is reflective. Whatever you push out into the universe comes back to you. I think
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's actually a physical law of the universe, and it may be something really basic because the universe is curved. So it's almost like a boomerang effect, with you throw something out and it comes back, or it could just be a karmic law, the divine law. But it's very clear that whatever you put into the universe will be coming back to you. So if you withhold love, you are going to withhold it from yourself.
Go ahead, Patricia. Go ahead.
Yeah, it also has to do with accepting our imperfections, which we tend not to do. And then, this is part of why we don't love ourselves. We attach to our idealized self-image, say we're not there, so I'm nothing, I'm worth nothing because I'm not what and we don't accept the point we are at. And if we don't accept the point we're at, we don't know what the next step is.
Exactly.
That's true.
You have to accept life. It is what it is. And that includes us. We are what we are at this point. And flailing against that will not change it. So the more you can just accept yourself at this stage that you're at life as it is, you won't spend your energy. It's like, it reminds me of Don Quixote tilting at windmills. I mean, it was all imagined in his own mind. But the most interesting thing about the story about Don Quixote was not that he created witches that he went and battled, which were the windmills. He also created beauty where there wasn't any. So his old broken down mule, he turned into this beauty in his
No, that was the girl.
Yeah,
No.
Dulcinea. Yeah.
Right. So he created everything. He created witches out of windmills, and he created this beautiful stallion out of a broken down mule that could barely move. So it's us. We are creating our lives, our world. So fighting against it really is kind of, it just is. And it will change. This is what I'm now really sure of. It will change. We will get where we're all trying to go, probably on our hands and knees, begging God for mercy, but we will get there. So you just keep moving forward, however slowly and painfully you must move.
Thank you.
I may just be too practical in this, but I've approached the same thing that you're saying, Beverly, by looking at best I could, what is it that I don't like about myself? So specifically, it was physical look that, you know, I didn't have, everybody else was attractive and I wasn't. Let's just use that one, but I think I found a couple of them. And to really, to be honest, you know, to actually find something practical, you know, not to just have this general, I'm not good enough. Why am I not good enough? What is this? So I could get at where it originally came from. So I'm just suggesting, for me, it worked for me to look and say, what is it that I don't like about myself? Is it my physical look? Is it that I'm not smart enough? Is it that I'm not quiet enough? I talk too much. But, and then and delve into that, because none of it is real. But we think that part of it is real.
Well, it also sounds a little bit like, you know, that's the false guilt for not being perfect.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
what Patricia
you're
just said. I think that's true. Yeah.
It's like,
But for me, it was, I like it to be specific. It helped to say, clarify it, but absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Thinking you should be somewhere else.
also selfishness. I'm going to focus on myself and how I look, and instead of giving, instead of because, you know, when you show up for others, it doesn't matter what you look like, or that you don't, it's not important because something else happens.
It's the
right?
guy that's always saying, if we take ourselves too seriously, we're going to get into trouble.
Right.
It's like,
Darn tootin', right?
Well, there's another confusion. There's another confusion, which is that when there's another confusion, which is that when we're loving and taking care of ourselves, we're being selfish. Right?
Mhm.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. I turn it around and I say, love thyself. And from this love, we have love for our neighbor.
Very good.
So I think I think we were told.
We have to slightly modify those commandments, right?
That's right.
Like in the Lord,
Right.
in the Lord's Prayer, you know, the guide says that there's one part of it that's wrong.
Yeah.
Where it says, lead us not in temptation.
oh, that, I think that's
The guide says-
translational. 'Cause
And
God
maybe
knows-
in the original Aramaic, it was
God's
different.
not gonna lead us into- I
Because it
always
should say,
say,
when in temptation, lead us.
right,
There
or
you
lead
go.
us in our temptation.
Right. Hey, now,
And
Tara, you
deliver
got to
us
say
from
something.
Yeah,
I
Because-
knew you would be coming here.
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But, you know, also
Okay,
that,
hello,
this is the
everybody.
man.
Hi.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, this is a really good lecture for me too. I mean, I have been with Pathworks for so many years, but I have so much resistance that what I do is I read the lectures, I think about a little bit, and then I start doing other things. And that has been my pattern pretty much. But I mean, a lot of people, like for instance, Jan says, don't be hard on yourself. Accept yourself the way you are. You get there when you get there. This is not a rush to end the game.
It's a
So
marathon, not a sprint.
you're right. Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So that's what I'm doing. And I think every time when I hear a lecture like this, there's always like a little something happening there. And I don't know how long it will stay there, but at least for a while. So I'm glad I was here tonight, that I learned whatever I learned. And I hope that everybody else is feeling the same way.
Thank you. Thanks, Tara.
After the meditation.
Yes, time for a meditation. I was
Light.
thinking that there are 3 kind of meditations in the lecture, which are just sentences to reflect upon. And I thought I would read them, and
Do you need
then,
more light?
no, I don't need any more light. And then we can have our 15 minutes of meditation. Okay, friends? Here they are. The first one is about the images. And the guide says, in my ignorance, I believe perhaps unconsciously so far that selfishness will bring me reward, will protect me from hurt. In what way have I been selfish? In what way has my conclusion been wrong from this viewpoint? What is the right conclusion? This is a meditation about unraveling the image, how you believe it would bring you a reward. In what way have I been selfish? The guide asks. The second one is a recognition about our images or our faults that we think we've transcended, but we might have to keep going back to them. And the guide says, you will find me as often as necessary. If you can find me again, it means you have not used this knowledge to the full extent. So I think we have to have the humility to realize that these images, it takes a long time. The feelings are slow learners. If we keep coming back to these feelings, there's a reason for it. And we have to pray for the humility and the wisdom to see it. And then the third one, the guide talks about making restitution for justified guilt. He says, I was too much of a coward to dare to love and forget my own little ego. I admit that I've hurt people by this attitude, and I'm now willing to learn exactly how I hurt them. It makes no difference whether I inflicted the hurt by deed, word, thought, or emotional reaction, by what I have done or left undone. I truly want to change. With the help of God, I will succeed. In order to do so, I must clearly see the direct or indirect hurts my attitude has inflicted upon others.
You want me to put 15 minutes on?
So let's meditate on those words.
Okay.